Assalamu alaikum and a very good day. I hope each one of you, of my Pakistan studies students, are fine, healthy, and trying to cope up with these difficult times. My prayers are with you, and I miss my class very much. Today we'll discuss the reading from the reading package, Jinnah's Secularism to Zia's Islamization Policy, and this we will cover in two parts. So I begin with the part one. And do forgive me, I have a kind of a cough drop in my mouth as my mouth gets very dried after recording all these lectures. In Jinnah's famous speech of August 11, 1947, which we have studied earlier, before the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, where he talked about the new state just 3 days before the official foundation of the new state, he outlined a perspective that was very similar to the one that would prevail in the future Republic of India. This speech followed by an important debate on the design of the Pakistan flag, and the Muslim League leaders argued in favor of their party flag becoming the national flag, whereas the representative of minorities objected that it represented a particular community. They were not heard, and Muslim League leaders arguing that the white patch, the flag, represented the minorities. After Jinnah's death in 1948, debates in the Constituent Assembly on that front proved complicated for Liaquat Ali Khan, and after his assassination in 1951, for those known as secularists due to opposition from religious activists in this legislative body, and from Islamist parties occupying the public space and street. The lack of consensus on the role of Islam in building the Pakistan state is very aptly pointed by Farzana Sheikh, and she has written a very good book, and which lead to more advantageous compromise to the secularists in the 1956 and 1962 Constitution. The conception of a nation state was not shared by the religious leaders responsible for the foundation of Jamiat-e-Ulama-e-Hind and Khilafat movement, or by Jamaat Islami. The Jamiat-e-Ulama-e-Hind, Islam, could not be reduced to a culture and identified with a nation state in the way that the two nation theory supposed. In fact, the split between ulama who were hostile to the idea of Pakistan and those who advocated it occurred in the mid-1940s, when those in favor ended up forming a substantial group. And this group then again further got divided into Deobandis and Barelvis. And the Barelvi ulamas, more numerous but far less organized than the Deobandis, they followed a similar path. In 1948, they formed this Jamiat-e-Ulama-e-Pakistan. A Sufi leader was its main figure, and who had joined the Muslim League in the 1940s. The Jamiat-e-Ulama-e-Pakistan and Jamiat-e-Ulama-e-Islam had campaigned as of 1947 for the creation of an Islamic state in Pakistan. The history of Jamaat Islami is bound with the trajectory of Sayyid Abul Ala Maududi, and Maudhudi's Islamic activism crystallized in 1920s in reaction to the so-called Shuddhi Hindu nationalist movement that aimed to reconvert both Christians and Muslims to the majority religion. Maudhudi was nevertheless tormented by a feeling of collective vulnerability that became all the more acute when in 1930 he settled in Hyderabad, Deccan, a princely estate that looked like one of the last Muslim hold. Maududi founded his Darul Islam movement in 1938, and then later he finally founded the Jamaat Islami in Lahore in 1941. According to Maududi, the residents of the Islamic estates are divided into 4 categories: male Muslims, female Muslims, Zimmis, protected subjects who followed a religion recognized by Islam, and the others, for example, the Ahmadis. Only the first 2 groups could be regarded as citizen. And this was against the spirit of the speech of August 11, where everyone in Pakistan was a citizen of Pakistan's state. Jamaat Islami was a very closely knit community. The JI was also very isolated in the 1940s, and Maulana Sayyid Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi was a respected Deobandi alim, and which posed a conflict between them and Jamaat Islami. The conflict naturally arose from the fact that Maududi did not belong to the community of ulama. And this has always been a hurdle, always a very, very difficult question. When partition came about, Maududi resigned himself to the idea of living in Pakistan created by Jinnah, while some members of Jamaat Islamis remained in India. Basically, all this affected the constitutional debate. The making of the Pakistani constitution was turned into a very delicate exercise due to the conflict between the secularists and the 2 organizations, Jamiyat-e-Ulama Islam and Jamaat-e-Islami. Liaqat Ali Khan succeeded in drafting of the objective resolution to the Constituent Assembly. It was presented on 12th March 1949. The resolution, like the one Nehru introduced before the Indian Constituent Assembly 3 years before, was intended to frame the debates. It already contained signs of effort to reach a compromise regarding the place of Islam. Maududi greeted the objective resolution as a victory for Islam and for the Jamaat, and the Muslim League leaders resigned themselves to making concessions, convinced that Jinnah's secular views had become untenable. But they tried to relegate Islam to the sphere of policy rather than law. And that is why Liaqat Ali Khan attempted to counter the clerics, the religious alims, by emphasizing the Islamic notion of social justice and his concept of Islamic socialism, and that was repeated by Bhutto many years later. But all this debate, all this conflict got strengthened by the anti-Ahmadi movement, and in 1956 a constitution came up which was neither secular nor theocratic. And Ayub Khan first military regime, it was secularism and statism. Ayub Khan also reformed Muslim practices he believed stood in the way of the country's progress, such as divorce by repudiation of wives and polygamy, which was not particularly prevalent in any case. He promulgated the Muslim Family Laws Ordinance in July 1961, and all these reforms clearly reflected the modernist influence of Aligarh University on him, where he has been in his youth. Before going to England, he pursued his studies in Aligarh. The political influence of religious leaders like peers and ulama, Ayub Khan tried to reduce the influence, but unlike the ulama, urban legal scholars of the Quran, the more rural peers owed their prestige to the mystic status their disciples, murid, attributed to them. The Pir Pagado was a case in point. He was hereditary spiritual leader of the Sufi order of Horse, the last man to bear this title in the colonial era, was hanged by the British in 1943 for political activities. The feeling of allegiance, not like Hindu disciples, paid to their gurus largely explain why religious figures have sought to translate their spiritual authority into worldly power. They merely have to contest an election to have a good chance of winning it. For Ayub Khan, the terms of these debates were thus clear as a representative of the state and the educated class, which was more liberal in its ideas. It was his duty to combat the obscurantism of the religious leaders who had gained power due to their influence over the common people. And in Ayub Khan's regime, we can call this the first time that state control of Islam came up. The Waqf ordinance that Ayub brought, the peers were the primary targets of the Waqf. Ayub Khan's education policy took the ulamas to task. So this outlook, induced by Ayub Khan to grant religion a less prominent place in his 1962 constitution than it had in 1956, he wanted to renege on the concessions made to the men of religion in 1956. Ayub Khan's rule thus took over more steps in the process of bringing Islam under state control, already initiated by Jinnah, a process that Jamal Malik has described as colonialism. Jinnah had attempted to turn Islam into an ethno-territorial ideology that could be exploited to political ends. These are the views of Christoph Jefferla. Personally, I don't agree with it, and I'm sure many of us don't agree with it. The most difficult part was the evolution by the dilution of Jamaat Islami discourse, a process indirectly related to Ayub Khan's policies. Ayub Khan targeted Jamaat Islami and initiated the colonization of Islam, as Malik calls it. He spared the peers to large extent, maybe for their power to get the votes. In fact, he was trying to benefit from the prestige of the sacred places peers were in charge of instead of fighting against his. We must understand that his policy was very different from those of his followers who initiated a process of Islamization.